Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting. Um, I'm glad the weather is not as cold, and we're having a good time here. I appreciate all of you guys coming. A lot more people told me they were coming, but traffic is pretty heavy here, so I'm probably some people are going to be dropping in later on today too. So I'm here because I support Kenyan McDuffie. I have met him uh, many years ago. I didn't even know we went to high school together. No, I do remember. I do remember. I remember seeing you delivering mail after high school. Yes, and stuff like that. We never really talked in high school, but I do remember. Um, and we traveled to San Salvador together. Patricia traveled with us. Jose, you went with us too. Yes, that was an excellent experience. So, did you learn some Spanish out of that? Let's tune it on.
Not much. Así.
Así, un poquito.
Un poquito.
You ate some pupusas, though.
Oh, I ate lots of pupusas.
You were flipping pupusas.
I was pretty good at flipping pupusas. And the good thing is he's got that on tape. So you're going to see a videotape of me flipping pupusas.
Yes.
I definitely did that really well.
Yeah, so are we live? Are we good? Thank you. So let's get comfortable. Let's talk a little bit about the campaign and things like that. And if you guys have any questions, you guys can ask questions too. I know you guys, some of you have already spoken to you, right?
Yeah, I know. We went around. If I didn't get a chance to meet you, then I'll make sure I do that before I leave. But I wanted to make sure I had an opportunity to say hello to everybody. You all look beautiful, and I'm glad you all took an opportunity to come out this evening. Thank you, Ricardo, for making this happen.
No, thank you. Thank you for coming. I think, and this is something that Patricia has said it before on previous campaign, I think for us Latino, it's important that we start getting involved with politics, and especially because we need our voice to be heard. We need. I'm here because I want to talk to you about the issues that affect me as an immigrant, as a Latino, and all that. And the only way you're going to know about our experiences, which sometimes is similar. I mean, I grew up in DC and all that. I came here as a teenager, but the only way you can also go and advocate with us in the council is knowing our issues. And the only way you can find out is by talking.
Yeah, no, I actually think that there are far too many people in positions of leadership who make assumptions about what people need or what they want. And my philosophy as somebody who is a fourth generation Washingtonian, born and raised here, is that you have to meet people where they are, right? And people need to be involved in the types of solutions that are being produced down at the Wilson Building. And so I've always tried to do that. I feel like I'm a decently smart guy, but I'm also humble enough to understand that I don't know everything. And the only way you really find out about people's needs is to ask them. And I think that's something that I've tried to really center as I do this work on the council.
Perfect. I'm a business owner. I'm a businessman. And when I go and I do business with people, it's different experience with different culture. When I do business with Latinos, they want to know everything about me, where I'm from, if I have children, and things like that. So we're going to ask you a little bit about that. We want to know who is McDuffie. Tell us about you, a little bit personal. I know that. Tell us
Sure.
if you have children and things like that.
Sure. No, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So I mentioned already that I've been here my entire life. I'm a fourth generation Washingtonian. I actually live in the home that my grandparents bought back in 1952. And so I'm the third generation of McDuffies to live in that home in North Capitol Street. And I live there today with my lovely wife, Princess, who is also born and raised here. She grew up in Southeastern Congress Heights. And our two daughters, Casey and Josie. Josie is 12. She'll be 13 in December. And then Casey will be 16 next month. And so really, I come from a close-knit, blue-collar, working-class household where my mom, born and raised here, graduated from my schools, was a library technician at the Library of Congress, worked an extra job part-time at the Hex department store in Silver Spring. My dad, who also graduated from Bell Vocational School, and he was an electrician. He worked at DPW, But he also worked an extra full-time job at night cleaning office buildings. And they wanted to provide a really solid foundation for us. And so we really grew up, me and my two older brothers and younger sister, with a solid foundation focused on family, on community, and on faith. And so we got a real good, solid grounding growing up. And really, that's who I am and where I started from. The work that I do at the council, I consider to be an extension of my desire to help my community. I really got into this early on as a neighborhood organizer. I was president of my civic association, believe it or not. But before I even got that far, I was just a regular kid growing up in Northeast DC. When we grew up, attended Wilson, now Jackson Reed, but I wasn't destined to be a politician. In fact, I didn't even go to college right away. I'm a lawyer today, and I think most people probably know that who know politics, but I didn't even apply to a single college coming out of Wilson, not one, because I didn't think that was my future. And I actually worked. Ricardo remembers I carried mail for several years after high school. I had 2 unsuccessful stints. I tried college at UDC. I didn't make it. I'll just say that. I had to leave both times. But eventually went back a third time. But it was really a decision marked by tragedy. And if you've been here long enough in the city, you remember what it was like in the District of Columbia in the 1980s and 1990s. You had communities really striving to make ends meet amid just really scary violence. And some of you all will recall the national news media referred to us as the homicide capital of the United States. And that's sort of the backdrop where we saw drugs really start to take over our community, and we saw people who were working lose their jobs, and it was just a really tough time. And so all those experiences growing up in the city really informed the work that I do today at the council. And so understanding that I'm a lawyer today only really happened because I grew up in the neighborhood with a community of people who wrapped their arms around me, and in many cases thought more of me than I thought of myself sometimes, you know. And so it really was a tough environment in which to grow up, but I was able to make it because I had some people that cared about me and really wanted to see me have a brighter future. Because there were a lot of people in my neighborhood who just did not make it. They dropped out of high school. Some of them went off to prison, and some of them tragically lost their lives in the community. And it was actually 2 of my friends who lost their lives that really sparked my decision to leave the post office, go back to UDC for the 3rd time, and then do really well. And I transferred over to Howard University, ended up graduating in the top 5% of my class and working for Eleanor Holmes Norton at the college. And so that's kind of the pathway. It was not a straight shot for me to get to, be a council member. It really was something that took a bunch of windy roads with a lot of help, a lot of falls, a lot of stumbles, a lot of people who helped pick me up and dust me off. And I think that is an extension of what public service should look like. You meet people where they are. You are a trustee amplifying their voices and really representing the interests that they would like to see in their elected officials. And frankly, we should be doing a lot more to make it more inclusive in our city.
No, and I totally agree with you. I think you have your story is it reminds me of how I came up here in DC. I came here in 1988, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been through so many things too, but your success or how you came back is very inspiring. Now tell us, you got into the council in 2012, right?
2012.
So tell us, how was that? How is the council? And I know now you're running for an at-large. You were a Ward 5 council member. How is this your position is going to change? And what have you accomplished in the last 10 years? And how are you planning to move forward?
Sure, absolutely. So, being somebody who grew up here and being a husband and a father, I bring those experiences with me too. And I think, frankly, if you read the news or you watch the news, you kind of hear so much about conflict and what makes people different and why people don't agree. And frankly, I've always taken the approach that as an elected official, you want to try to identify ways where you can connect with folks. And so for me, I knew that people wanted to have quality schools. They wanted to feel safe in their neighborhoods. And they wanted to be able to have neighborhood serving amenities like small businesses, like metros, and things like that. And so when I got elected in May of 2012, I really went about the business of trying to do just that. We didn't have any middle schools when I first got elected in Ward 5. So I work with the community. I work with the Ward 5 Education Council. I work with my colleagues at the time, including then Ward 4 Council member, Mayor Muriel Bowser, who was one of my colleagues on the council. And I worked to make sure that we had resources to do some of those things. Now we have McKinley Tech Middle School. Now we have Brookland Middle School. Now we have a new Edgewood Recreation Center. And I've tried to focus on small businesses to support them, to make sure that they have access to the resources on our main streets, right? I created some retail priority areas around neighborhoods like Rhode Island Avenue corridor. We supported the North Capitol Main Street as well. And so you see restaurants along Rhode Island Avenue. Ivy City didn't exist in the way that it did when I first took office. And I worked with that community because when we do economic development, we have to be smart about it. We have to make sure that we are creating opportunities that bring people in. We can build buildings, but we also have to build up the people in the communities around those buildings so that they see themselves reflected in the beautiful diversity in our city. And so I've been privileged over the last 10 years to work with, I think, a bunch of phenomenal people on my staff to do things like support some of the small businesses where we have restaurants around Ivy City, we have distilleries, we have breweries, we have small businesses in communities like this that are bustling. It's creating jobs for people, right? And that's about, I think, a lot of the things that people would like to see in their neighborhoods. It's really not rocket science when it comes down to it.
I live in Ivy City. I live in Ivy City. I've seen the changes. Now we have the Target. We have the pet store. But there was something that you also did for the neighborhood on a sunny day, which I think is very important because that makes a difference. You know, when you go northwest and all that, you see it. But in Ivy City, we didn't see it. Can you talk about exactly what you did with Ivy City?
Yeah, Ricardo knows. When I first took office, I was, I always visited a lot of neighborhoods throughout the ward. As a ward councilman, we always want to stay connected with residents. But there was one early point in my career as council member where we did a walk in Ivy City. And it was a summer day, but it was extraordinarily hot. And I remember us saying, we should take a quick break. Normally, if you're in a neighborhood somewhere, you take a break, you might lean on a tree under some shade or something, and there was no trees in sight. And it was like, you look up and it's like, okay, you're probably a couple of degrees warmer in this neighborhood with all this asphalt without a real tree canopy, right? And so I went, identified money in the budget, and said we should do some streetscape in and around this community, working with the Civic Association, working with the ANCs, and we literally put money in the budget to have DDOT build out trees in the community. And for me, it is some of the small things that people really never read about in the Washington Post or in the city paper, but still, nonetheless, make a difference for people in those communities, right? It's the small things that show that your government really cares about you, that your council member really cares about you. And had I not showed up to do that walk, to meet those people in their community, then perhaps I would not have felt that warmth in the way that I did and work with those community residents to be able to put those trees there. And so I appreciate you asking about that. A lot of folks don't even ask about those types of things, but I think that's what makes our city special if we can make that work with elected officials that have those special bonds with their neighbors.
Well, when you look at the United States and historically, it seems that the neighborhoods that have trees are the most wealthy neighborhoods. The racial disparities you can see on those neighborhoods and all that. So when I moved in, we didn't have no trees, but now I see the trees. And when you mentioned that the last time, I was like, thanks God you did that because it is important.
Yeah.
We need to be shared. And we have children in the neighborhood. Now we have a park, that I take my daughter to play with. So I'm happy. Those are some things that you've done.
We put money in the budget to do that park, which is temporary because working with Mayor Bowser and Deputy Mayor Fachikio, we actually she identified $20 million, and we have that in the budget to do a whole new recreation center at the whole old historic Carmel School. And so that is going to totally transform that neighborhood. It is the center of the neighborhood. It's been closed for decades, and it's not been utilized by the folks who live in that community. And where else would you go where you'd have a tremendous potential resource and have a city and elected officials who are investing in your community so that you can have the same amenities that people have in other parts of the city?
I'm a business owner, and I have spoken to some people that have benefited from the Commercial Property Acquisition Fund. tell us about this fund. Tell us how you established this fund and what is the purpose.
So when I took over chairmanship of the council's Committee on Business and Economic Development back in January 2017, actually before um, you know the tragic killing of George Floyd and a lot of the racial justice work was dominating the headlines, I pulled together a working group on racial equity, social justice, and economic inclusion. I did it because I wanted the city to be intentional about how economic growth, which any city should strive for, but how that economic growth need to be inclusive and not displace folks. Having grown up here, like the folks who recognize, we came a long way from the 90s when we were teetering on the brink of insolvency to where we are today, especially pre-pandemic. But we lost thousands of residents, minority residents, black and brown folks along the way. And I think looking at the future, we need to make sure we can build up and grow economically and include folks. The Commercial Acquisition Fund was one of a number of things that I funded in the budget a couple of years ago to create economic opportunities for small businesses. What we did there was say, one of the ways that people build wealth in the United States is through ownership of property, right? Residential, commercial. So I took that, put $4 million in the budget, and set up a program that's being administered by the mayor that says you can apply as a business owner renting your property and get up to 25% of the cost, up to $750,000 in the form of a grant to acquire your commercial property, right? We're trying to do things that are transformational and create opportunities for folks to build wealth and close here in our city what is one of the widest racial wealth gaps of any city in the United States. And so I think being intentional about those things is extraordinarily important for us as a world-class city, and having people in government understand the history and then work with people to try to solve for those intractable issues is something that we need in our representation. So it's something that I've been really proud of. You know, folks who have applied and have benefited from it. I've seen some folks who've benefited from it. And I think we're just starting to see what that potential is. And in fact, we got an extra $4 million thanks to the mayor in the budget for this year, started on October 1 to do even more of the Commercial Property Acquisition Fund.
And I think that's so important because a lot of people don't understand. If you want to buy a house, you only need 3% down. But if you want to buy a commercial property, most banks will request to have at least 20% down, which is a lot if you're a small business owner. If a property is $1 million, I mean, you have to come out with $200,000. So I think the $750,000 threshold is very good.
So can I just build on that a little bit, Ricardo, too? Because I mean, some of the other things I've done, I work with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I work with the Black Chamber of Commerce. I work with the Minority Contracting Association, because another way that people have been able to take care of themselves, provide for their families, and put people to work is through entrepreneurship and small businesses, government contracting, and recognizing the opportunities in a city that spends over $1 billion in procurement, goods and services. To me, is one of the ways that we've done well by workers in our city, and trying to make sure a greater share of that goes to minority contractors has been something that's a priority for me. And so I funded a disparity study in the budget a couple of years ago, and I just had a conversation. I won't spoil the news, but I'm working with the executive because I think we need to have a minority and women business enterprise program in the District of Columbia like we used to about 30 years ago.
Beautiful, beautiful. I heard of the baby bond. I read a little bit about it, but could you explain to us how does the baby bond works? How can someone qualify?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, making sure that we're thinking about people of all incomes and backgrounds in the District of Columbia is something that I've centered through the work on racial equity, really putting in place a racial equity agenda. And one of the other initiatives that I worked really hard on was to author and work to fund $32 million for the Child Wealth Building Act. We call it baby bonds for short. What it says is that a baby born in the District of Columbia into a family making up to 300% of the federal poverty level automatically gets an account created, a trust fund, just for being born poor in our city. And it's a interest-bearing account that gets up to $1,000 per year, depending on your parents' income, that accrues interest over time, so that when you turn 18 years old, you have that money waiting for you. And imagine what some of these young folks right now who are growing up in families that are in poverty can do with $15, $20, $25,000 to invest in themselves, to start a small business, to maybe put some money into college, or to take up a trade, or to put a down payment on a house. I mean, imagine the sorts of wealth building activities you can engage in, which frankly people across this country have been doing for generations because they've been able to pass down wealth. We're going to be able to do some of that here in the District of Columbia. So I'm really excited about that. We are one of only 2 jurisdictions in the country that have been able to do that. And in fact, we're leading because we actually funded it here in the District of Columbia. And it is actually a retroactive bill. So when the CFO puts it out finally in a couple months, it's going to date back to October 1, 2021 for babies that were born there.
Wow, it makes me want to have another child, man. I interviewed some people that were recently released from jail, people that have been incarcerated since the 90s for nonviolent crime. Can you tell us about that, what you did, or how do you help, because I think that's important.
Yeah. So some years ago, I chaired the Council's Committee on Public Safety and the Judiciary. And it was at a time where, we're seeing some spikes in crime and violence. And having a background similar to mine, where, of course, I'm a former prosecutor, I'm a former DOJ trial attorney, where I investigated police departments when they were engaged. There were allegations of them engaging in a pattern of practice of misconduct. But before I was doing any of that work, I was a kid growing up in D.C. During the crack epidemic, when law enforcement had descended onto neighborhoods. So I know, unfortunately, what it felt like to have, cuffs on your wrist at 15 years old in my own neighborhood. And so I approached my work as chair of the Public Safety Committee through the lens of that upbringing and my professional experience to say, we've got to do a couple of things. We've got to hold people accountable when they commit crimes. But then we also have to recognize that some neighborhoods haven't really had the sorts of opportunities that lift them up out of poverty and keep them from deciding to engage in a life of crime. And so we invested in the NEAR Act in a community policing model that said we're going to make sure that law enforcement has the resources they need to build and foster trust in neighborhoods. But then we're also going to make sure we're exposing people to opportunity. And part of that also was comprehensive juvenile justice reform, recognizing that some young folks have been arrested at really young ages, under 18, and yet had served 20 years or more in prison. And those folks, in some cases, deserve perhaps to have a second chance. It wasn't a decision I was making on my own. It is a decision that says you have an opportunity to have your sentence reviewed by a judge to determine whether you've been sufficiently rehabilitated and deserve to be released. And we've seen about 80 people come home as a result of that work, and they're doing some phenomenal work. People like Halim Flowers, who is an amazing artist who is touring and doing shows all around the country. People like Kareem McCraney, who is a violence interrupter in one of the toughest neighborhoods in my ward, but has the credibility to connect with those young folks because he came from that community, right? He can connect in a way that I can't or other council members can't. And we have to recognize that some people need those supports and those resources. And the NEAR Act creates the Pathways program through the mayor. And we work with the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, where we're literally putting people in a classroom setting. We are pairing them with mentors. We are putting a stipend in their pocket. And if they successfully complete that 9-month program, they get subsidized employment at the end. We're putting people on a trajectory that changes their lives in our city, recognizing that we have serious public safety problems, but we need a whole of government approach to address that. And we have to treat violence like a public health epidemic and try to stop the spread so it's not reaching other communities, but identifying those communities that have been hardest hit and recognizing that it's not thousands of people who are engaging in this stuff. It's a handful of people, and we need to focus the resources on them so we can keep all communities safe.
Do you guys have any questions? I know I'm asking a lot of questions. Patricia, hit us.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing excellent.
Excellent. Because you're in a tough position right now. Let's say I've been of Colombia to the best and then going back and forward. What is your how do you see us Latinos integrating in the whole society as a politician, as a father, as a business person?
That's a great question. And I appreciate the question. I appreciate the perspective, having been here for 40 years. I see Latinos integrating into society in a way that is seamless so that work, play in an environment that is safe and healthy so that their residents and Latino residents can thrive, so that Latino-owned small businesses can thrive just like any other small business owner or resident or family in the District of Columbia. We need to make sure that when we're doing the work of government, we're putting an equity lens on everything that we do. And that's another bill that I legislated that is called the Racial Equity Achieve Results Act. We call it the REACH Act for short. It says when we do our business, we should score legislation that comes to the council using a racial equity impact assessment to measure the impact on minorities, right? You've been here 40 years, so you know that we've changed over the last 25 or 30 years to the point where we've seen our population grow over the last 25 years by 33%. We've seen small business ownership grow by 23%. And we've seen jobs and workers have opportunities by an additional 45%. But I said it earlier, and I think it's worth restating. We lost a lot of minorities along the way. We pushed people out who couldn't get jobs, right? Who didn't have a certain level of education to compete for certain types of employment, right? Who couldn't afford the home or the rent as it continued to escalate. And so I see a city where Latinos, like every other race, ethnicity, regardless of what you look like, who you love, how much money you have, being able to look at the District of Columbia and see it as an opportunity city. And that to me is a vision that I think is shared by most people, regardless of their race.
The other question that I have is, the program of CBE. CBE is very attached to my heart. Why? Because I see the program of the CBEs actually being a subcontractors entity. And for the longest, we have tried to kind of go to the mid grade, but you really have to really struggle in order to go to the, like anybody is considered small businesses, but you really have to be in the millions of dollars. But with all my respect, big companies, they have to come out of the program. You have to put a cap what regulates really what a small contractor to the city, that we create millions of dollars. But what we have done for years is create a subcontractor lane. We have the title of general contractors, but bonding capability 15 $20 million, that's the cap that we can do, but we cannot go over that. With my experience, I do buildings ground up, but in the trade, actually, they say you're not qualifying. Who will be telling me who is not qualified when I know owners that do not have to read plans and they are telling me you're not qualified? That case, I think the revision of the law, revision of the program has to be made capable to the company's representative knowledge. That's how we're gonna grow, because a roofer can actually make thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, but depends on who actually is dealing with that case. Please make sure that CBE laws and CBE procedures are actually, and the accountability of contracts. Accountability of contracts are must do. I've been a part of many other projects where accountability was not even there because I wasn't even there, but my name was there. That case, a lot of things for you again.
No, it's a lot of things, but they're all important, and I appreciate you raising them because you have to be able to make sure that you're connecting people with opportunities. If you're signing up as a CBE, you should be able to see what the opportunities are. And there should be some advantage as a local business over others, particularly from outside of the city, which is why I've really focused and worked with DSLBD to put an emphasis on that accountability that you're talking about. Before 2000, I want to say 15 or 16, we couldn't see evidence where a large contractor who didn't honor the 35% spend or the first source had been fined or penalized, right? They would agree pretty routinely to do those things, to engage in 35%, to engage with first source hiring, but then nobody was holding them accountable. And so they just really flouted the law. And so what we've seen over the last few years, and Christy and folks at DSWD deserve some credit. They are starting to make sure that they're penalized, and they know when they come before me for performance oversight, I'm going to ask those types of questions, because if contractors aren't being held accountable, then they're going to do whatever they want to do, and maybe just tuck a little bit of money away for the cost of doing business, but it's going to not create the opportunities for our CBE program and our CBE businesses to grow in our city. And frankly, there's no real benefit to even being a CBE in some cases. And so I also think, though, that, and I mentioned this earlier, it's also important to recognize that the CBE program is one thing, but it's also race and gender neutral, right? So you can be a CBE and be a wealthy corporation based on the District of Columbia because you are here, right? And a small business owner that can do a few $1 million or has to compete with those large companies that are also CBEs, and there's really no advantage to that. And what I know from my interactions with a lot of the minority contractors is they're the ones on the ground in these communities where you have hard to reach employees and folks with barriers to entry to the workforce who are being engaged and hired, right? And so if we make that connection and understand the small business ecosystem in our city, then we would want to do more to help them because they're helping our city, right? There's an economic benefit to the District of Columbia if I'm helping your small business, right? It's a dollars and cents thing, and I think we need to tell that story more so that people understand, A, why we need to work so hard on holding people accountable in our CBE business, in our CBE community, and making sure that if they don't comply with the law, that they pay for it. And then number two, making sure that we have a MWBE program where there's a sheltered market for minority-owned, women-owned business enterprises. And I think in our world-class city, we can do both things. We can walk and chew gum.
Thank you.
So it was really inspiring, man. I'm really glad that I got to know you more, actually, based on great questions, man. Really, really appreciate that. And just coming from Maria's standpoint, I wanted to add to that because I've been a CB since 2008. I've been living here for quite a long time. My kids graduated from all the schools that you mentioned from here. They went to school here. And one of the things is people like myself, I don't come from an educated background. So what in my trade I do floors. So what happens is that based on the way the CBE law is, it doesn't quite benefit, especially when you live in here, subcontractors. And what happens is a lot of subcontractors and a lot of Latinos, we are a small business that do like painting, we do drywall, we do the trades that really, it's not like we got to go to school, so we're working hard. But something, when we dress, every building here is dressed by us. Literally, it's like a dress, right? We put their clothes on. and that's who we are. But what happens is that the big companies that come here, meaning they just have the business and they automatically become the CBE. They're not invested here. And then what happens also is that 33%. What I suggest is 33% should go to all the subcontractors, not 33% from the top. So what happens is 33% on the top don't matter. Like by the time it gets to me, I'm the last person. It doesn't matter. As much as I invest in the city, I go this and I constantly don't get work because of that. I almost like it, and it's frustrating. So to look at that law in a sense of all subcontractors being part of that 33%, that will create an advantage.
I appreciate that, and I will definitely look into that. But also something I've been focused on is making sure subs get paid on time. Right? I've heard too many stories of subs being squeezed by the primes for whatever reason, and ended up going out of business or ended up having to take out emergency loans. I mean, it is creating a scenario where it's almost a disincentive to be a CBE in the District of Columbia, where you got to compete with these large corporations. You got to compete with these folks who are trying to hope, like they're out of town corporations. They want to put a subsidiary in the District of Columbia. They don't call it a subsidiary, but they get all the benefits of the CBE program and then all the resources of the out of town company. It's just not fair. Right? And our system, at the very least, needs to be fair and just to our CBE programs, particularly those that are resident owned. Category, um, but essentially it looks at focusing for resident owned disadvantaged business owners, right? Because we can't have a racially based program in the District of Columbia, not yet. Hopefully we will soon. But I looked at and created that equity enterprise designation. That's what it is, based on the federal government's definition of disadvantage, and use our resident owned so that we have a special advantage outside of some of these other companies that have a lot more capital, a lot more access to funds and out of town resources. So I want to look at what you just mentioned, though, because I think that's important too.
We have another question here.
Hey, Kenyan, as an educator, I just want to know what's happening with the migrant buses, because what I'm seeing in schools is like money that it was allocated for our EL students now has to be like pulled back because we're having an influx of new Latinos. So now our kids that are in school, they're not receiving tutoring, they're not receiving all this work because the money now is going to the incoming one. So what's happening? Like
that shouldn't be the case. First of all, I think there are way too many schools where school leaders are using funds that are specifically designated for ESL or for at-risk in ways that are non-compliant with the laws and our regulations. And that shouldn't be happening in any school. It especially shouldn't be happening to our students who are English language learners. And it shouldn't pit ESL students that are already here against, migrant families with students who are coming. And frankly, most of them are here not because they want to be, but because you have horribly, just really abhorrent governors in Texas and Arizona that are playing politics with people's lives. And so if there's specific schools you know about it, then I would love to know where that's happening, because our school budgets should be more transparent, where not only experts in school leadership or principals or administrators understand where the money is and how it's being spent. You should be able to understand that if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a school librarian, if you're a school counselor. It should be something that is a basic standard for schools across the District of Columbia. And I definitely would love to work with you to understand where that's happening, and specifically why the resources aren't flowing the way they're supposed to flow. And if additional resources are necessary, what we've seen with the mayor establishing the Office of Migrant Services is really trying to identify and frankly ask more of our federal government, right? Because a lot of this is really federal politics. But what I appreciate about our city as a sanctuary city is that we care about people. We care about human lives. And we're going to do everything we can within our power and our resources to care for people, whether they want to be here or not, while they're here. And so I definitely would love to figure out how we can address that issue, because we shouldn't be squeezing students who all are in need.
One of my biggest problems that I mentioned back in the days to Adrian and to Mary Bear, something has to have to change in the safety of the kids in school. I call it like a right elephant the schools. Your security, everything is in your security, all of them are in the front desk and everything. And usually all what is happening is in the bathrooms. It needs to be a security system in the hallways and in the bathrooms in the schools. Something has to be regulated because everything that happens in the schools is happening in those two locations. Recently, I was doing HVAC on one of the middle schools. Big fight was happening in the middle of the hallway. Nobody was looking at it. That case, school system security needs to be looked at it and review it if you become our new at large council member, that you will have overseeing of every single school in the district. That's something for you to look at it.
No, I appreciate that. I think students should feel safe in schools. We should feel safe wherever we go in our city, but especially inside of our school. And I work really hard to make sure that I support safe passage programs to make sure kids can get to or from school. In fact, I've showed up at several schools and work with the folks who are doing the safe passages work. I think that if there are challenges with security in schools, then we need to make sure that those schools have resources to keep a safe environment inside, because there are collateral consequences to that. If students don't feel safe, it's a disincentive for them to even come to school, right? And you have parents who are worried about that. And I actually got a call 2 days ago from somebody who had an issue with bullying, and I didn't send them to one of my staffers. I took the call myself, and I connected them with some of the school resources, both the administrators, but also some of the safe passages workers who are on the ground in many of these schools. If they're effective and they're good, they know a lot of these students. They know their coaches. They know the teachers, and they're really integrated into the school community. And I think that's always got to be paramount when we think about that learning environment, that these kids and everybody who's a part of the school community, teachers, administrators, parents, feel safe. We're hearing too many stories about students fighting, parents fighting, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can humanly possible to address that.
I know you have something else to do. You got another place to go. Before you go, is anything at the end? Oh, you wanted a quick question?
I live in Northwest DC. I know you're from Ward 5, and early on we talk about how I see you in the council, because I've been in the community in DC for over 25 years. And when you came to the council, you only not only work for issues related to Ward 5, but also issues related to our district residents at large. And you've shown how you've done that with describing the legislative that you've done in the council. So, and one thing that I really appreciate is the fact that you've seen the opportunity of increasing the participants in the democratic system in our city, allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections, which is one of the big items in the council now. There's a first reading on it. How do you see that moving forward, and how do you see non-citizens who are residents of the District of Columbia paying taxes, having the kids in our schools and being part of our society, being incorporated in the system, and also another questions to do with wage theft. wage theft among our community, our low income community, is huge. I know that the DC Attorney General's office have taken care of the big items, big companies, taking care of not paying their workers fairly or not paying them. But we need to do better in terms of the low wage workers, including day laborers in your district who are being in this situation.
Absolutely. We're doing some things and we clearly need to do more. But anybody who steals from our workers need to be held accountable. Period. Full stop. There should be consequences. There should be consequences from our government in every tool that we have to make sure that others see the consequences and it deters that type of behavior, because there are too many people who try to take advantage of non-citizens who live here, are striving to make ends meet, who are simply trying to work to take care of themselves and their families, right? We want that. I want that. I mean, everybody, I'm sure, raise your hand if you want that as well. We all want that. I mean, it's a basic tenet of living in a democratic society that we are just and we are fair. And to your other point, making sure that non-citizens, temporary residents, others with visas have the opportunity to vote and participate and exercise their right to the franchise is extraordinarily important as well. The contributions that the Latino community makes in our city are clear, as far as I'm concerned, crystal clear. We would not be the city that we are today were it not for the contributions that you all are making today, that you have made for decades, and that you all will make well into our future. And I think you all have every right to participate and see leadership elected to office that reflects your images as well. I believe that deeply, and I'm willing to work and continue to work with you all to make sure that it happens.
Thank you. Thank you. So we want to say thank you to Mechos for allowing us to be here today. Thank you guys for coming. And before you leave, council member, is there a question that I didn't ask you that you would like to share with the audience?
It's more of a comment, less of a question, but we're down to 18 days in this election. We need everybody to come out and vote. I only win if everybody votes. And I know we're going to win. That means you all got some work to do. But this has been amazing. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you all for coming out this evening. It's got a little chilly since the sun has gone down. But I really appreciate all that you all have done. So thank you.
And thank you to those that are watching us online. And where can they find more information about you? Can we follow you?
You can follow me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and McDuffie4DC.com. McDuffie4DC.com. More information about our platform and all the amazing things we've done and all the amazing things we're going to do together once we win this thing on November 8th.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.